LMC casts a wide net over the Sound Shore to bring you local event info, profiles, and conversations. Recorded in the heart of the village in Mamaroneck Cinemas at the studio on the Avenue, LMC Media brings you the LMC Cast Community Profiles.
Hey everybody, Matt Sullivan here, Executive Director of LMC Media. We are in the studio on the Avenue, located in beautiful downtown Mamaroneck. I am thrilled today to be joined by a friend who I have not seen in many years, a graduate of Mamaroneck High School, a friend of mine, Mr. Tom Rotenberg. He is a filmmaker and a video artist and an overall pretty awesome guy. Tom, welcome to the LMC Cast.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure.
Pleasure to be here in this new, incredible space.
Thank you so much. Well, you of all people, I think, would appreciate being in this type of an environment. Tell me a little bit about your career as a filmmaker, how you got into it, and we have a lot to catch up on. It's been a long time.
Yeah. It's been a journey. I graduated from Mamaroneck High School entirely too long ago, let's just say. I went to NYU for film school and worked in various capacities in the entertainment industry ever since about 2006, 2007. My first job was in development at HDNet Films. After that, was shut down. I did some freelance work. Kicked around New York, went to LA for a bit, came back, started at the Main and NY Media Center by IFP, where I got into a lot of video art, non-traditional media formats and media experiences. And that really informed a lot of my own creative work and kind of pushed me not necessarily away from more traditional filmmaking, but into more experimental modes, new ways of telling stories, new ways of thinking about how to convey stories to an audience. And I'm now kind of circling back to more traditional filmmaking and trying to infuse it with a lot of the more experimental techniques that I've been developing over the last decade.
That's great. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing a lot of this work. Now, projects that you're working on right now, tell us a little bit about what you have cooking.
Totally. Currently working on a feature film. It's been in the pipeline for about a year and a half, I would say. Got a really great team on board right now. We're looking to shoot in early May as our start date in Pennsylvania, in the forest. I've got a really great team of people. My producer on this project was actually my boss at HDNet Films back in the day, and my DP on this project is a DP that I worked with on my last short film back in, we shot that in 2019, pre-COVID. And got some really great other department heads, working with a really great casting director. Everyone in Pennsylvania has been really amazing to work with thus far on just finding the locations. We're trying to do everything on set, or at least, in the real world as much as possible in order to have, that kind of interactivity that I think is missing in a lot of higher budget productions today. That's very antiseptic and sterile and green screen focused. I try to get away from that and lean into kind of real world interactions.
I can certainly appreciate that. I know as a filmmaker myself, a lot of, I think, the fun of making films is about the camaraderie and the teamwork and everything that happens on a set that you don't get really in any other profession, right? What are some of the challenges that you're facing now, or some of the, the biggest challenges that you have coming up with this film?
Oh boy, there's always challenges, and I think it's the challenges that you're not expecting that are the most challenging, but I think also the most fun to deal with, if that makes sense. I think one of my favorite things about working on a production with a team of people is when those challenges arise, how do you solve them? How do you pivot and be creative and still maintain a really good work environment for the team that, you know, as the director, you're managing? And, you know, I think the biggest challenges with, I think, any independent film nowadays is sticking to a budget and also, you know, maximizing, you know, how those dollars are spent. You know, you want to make sure as many of those dollars show up on screen as possible, and that you're not dumping them into categories that don't really show up on the screen. You know, how do you maximize your spend, especially when you're working on a genre project, as I know you work on genre projects as well. You know, how do you sell the spectacle? You know, that's one of the first questions my producer came to me with. You know, how do we sell the spectacle? Mm-hmm. What are the key moments that may need a little bit more of a, you know, dump of the financing than other elements, but you know, you want to make sure that spectacle is believable, you know, especially when you're dealing with science fiction, which was my genre of choice for the last decade or so. You know, how do you make it believable? How do you make the world believable? Even if it's, you know, not necessarily like hard sci-fi where you're really, you know, doing a lot of CGI and understanding the science around things. You know, I try to keep everything character focused. But that's
at the base of all of it, right? Characters and story.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, whenever all the films that I've taken the most from, it's been character journeys and how those characters evolve and how those characters can be used to represent ideas and perspectives, and then how you interweave those through the story and what conclusions, you know, that you as a filmmaker arrive at, and how you convey those conclusions and ideas to the audience.
Well, you're in a unique position because you're a triple threat. We have a writer, director, and an editor. Yeah. So you're really able to hone in, I think, on how you'd like to tell your story, how you'd like to portray these characters. What are some of the advantages and disadvantages of sort of overseeing and, you know, having all three of those roles in a film?
You know, I think the greatest advantage is you're controlling your own destiny as much as you can, you know, industry machinations aside.
A lot of pressure too.
There's a lot of pressure, you know, but I think at this point in my career, having made as many things as I've made and worked in as many sides of the industry as I've worked, I think, you know, it's the next step. You know, I think as a creative individual, you know, you can only be so content working at a given level for so long. You know, I've been making like video art commissions and projection mapping installations for almost 10 years now. Like later this year is going to be like the 10th anniversary of my first like commissioned art film. Thank you. And you know, you at least for me, as a creative person, you know, I'm always trying to elevate what I do in terms of, you know, both getting it out to a wider and wider audience, but also, you know, what I'm saying, how I'm saying it, you know, the techniques that are being used. It's certainly daunting when you're looking up at that next level, and the workflow that's involved, the amount of people that are involved, the amount of dollars that are involved to make a lot of these things happen, and it's terrifying. I mean, you know, but at the same time, it's like what I have to do.
It's also your vision.
Yeah, yeah. You know, you as a creative, I think any creative person, you know, there's nothing more satisfying than making a project and like bringing so many different people together and creating something that even if it doesn't resonate with other people immediately, it resonates with you and you get
Right.
excited about it and you want to get it out there and, you know, just have people react to it and respond to it in an emotional way. And I think, you know, when you're making shorts, when you're making smaller projects for a long time, you know, that ends up, you know, you kind of hit a wall at some point where you say, okay, you know, it's time to make something bigger next time. And I think that's the biggest challenge for any, you know, filmmaker is how do you level up? How do you get to the next stage?
Is there talk a little bit about the process of jumping from short into feature? What are some of the things that you have to think about and approach differently going into the feature world?
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, a little bit of like background on me. A lot of my commissioned video installations, I'm a one-man show. Anything that needs to be shot, I shoot myself. I coordinate whatever shoots need to be done. I do all of the VFX and manipulations. So, you know, going from that to even a more narrative-based, you know, production short film that I did a few years ago, I think the biggest thing that I had to learn or understand, even though you know a lot of things in theory, and then you actually get on set, and it doesn't always play out the way it did in your head. But you know, you're, in addition to being, you know, the creative who has to answer every single question that every department head has, you know, you also have to manage all of those department heads. You have to manage everyone
personalities as well.
You have to manage their personalities. You have to, you know, manage the actors, convey everything that you need to convey to them in order to help their performance, and just creating a good on-set experience for everybody. You know, I think this industry has a reputation, and deservedly so, you know, over the last 30 years probably, of being really harsh and big personalities that clash and need things done a certain way. And, you know, you end up with on-set experiences that are tremendously negative. And I think that's always visible on screen. You know, I would rather a film, you know, be less financially successful and everyone have a great experience from it than, you know, a film is a big hit and you've made people feel terrible about themselves.
And that's, I mean, the overall film culture, right, is if we can create those spaces where people walk away with a good experience having made a film, they bring that to the next project, next project after that. So I think there's, you know, we've reached a point in time now with this industry where we do have to focus on, you know, being more of a team player, making sets and comfortable for people. And, you know, there are long, grueling hours that people work, especially if you're up doing night shoots. So I think when you spoke about that changeover between a short and a feature, you're on set with your team for, you know, anywhere between 15 to 30 days, or if not more, right? Whereas with the short, maybe it's a weekend.
It's a lot easier on a short to just not think too hard about everyone else and be, you know, especially if you're the writer director, you know, this is my vision. It has to be this way. I think the best parts of being on set are seeing what other people can contribute. And when you want people to contribute in positive ways, you have to have a positive set, you know. And I think it's especially challenging nowadays with costs rising, expenses, you know, always growing, to have a set like that. You know, it does require a certain level of funding and, you know, putting funds in the appropriate buckets for the production. But you want people to be operating at their best. You know, you get the best out of people when they feel supported and valued. And I always want people to feel valued and important, and able to contribute their skills.
That's very admirable, and I think to your point, it shows on screen when that happens. Tell me a little bit about your directorial process in terms of working with actors, and obviously you've written the script, you have it in your head a certain way that an actor is going to read or portray this character. To what extent does that actor have flexibility in terms of being creative, as you mentioned, and finding some of those organic moments on set to improv?
Yeah, no, totally. And I think this actually applies for more than just actors. It applies for all the department heads
Sure.
that I work with. Is I love when they improvise and come up with something cool. I will always, as long as my AD says we've got the time to do it, I will always try something out. I'm always game for trying that out. There might be moments throughout the script where there is a way that I want it to be done specifically. But I think the way that I operate and the way that I feel the most satisfied with the final product is when people make the characters themselves. I mean, one of the first things I always say to the actors is, unless I say otherwise, make the lines your own. If you want to change some words here and there, if you want to change intonation on something, if you want to emphasize a different element, let's try it. Let's see how it goes. I always kind of, think of my characters almost as blank slates, that are more representative of themes and concepts. And then I let the actors come in and infuse themselves into those characters and give the moment to moment existence of that character more life.
I like that approach.
Particular to their own lived experiences.
That's great. Yeah, and it certainly makes for, again, I think a more realistic portrayal of potentially a fictional character, but they buy into it. They feel, I think, they can own the character a little bit more.
Yeah.
And, to that extent, let's talk quickly about sort of practical effects, shooting on location. We had mentioned green screen before, and, just some of the things that we can do, I think, on sets relatively quickly or easily to provide a more realistic set for everyone who's working there. I mean, I know as a filmmaker myself, being in front of or behind screens, it just doesn't really work for me. I don't know how you feel about it.
I never want to do anything that is not on an actual location. If there's a certain sequence that needs to be shot in a entirely green screened room, which I might do for a certain sequence of this, at the very least have practical elements for the actors to work with. I think that's something that's getting lost in a lot of, big budget productions nowadays, because it's not necessarily cheaper to do it all on a green screen, but it is more reliable in terms of timeline and scheduling. A lot of the big budget films that come out nowadays, they already have a release date before shooting even starts. Right. They're very much conscious of, how much can we spend to churn this out in as reliable a manner as possible. And you certainly, when you're shooting on set, on location, there's a lot of, who knows what might happen.
A million different elements.
A million different things can happen, but you're giving not just your actors, but everyone on the team, a physical space to inhabit and work with, and it lets things evolve. It lets you have happy accidents. Those are the most magical moments on set, when various elements combine to give you something that you could have never possibly planned for in pre-production. Yeah. And those are always the moments that that jump out to me and are generally form the backbone of when I'm editing something. I try to look for those moments and build out from there, because then I know I'm hitting the emotional beats that I want to hit.
Why film? This is we all know what we signed up for here. It's not an easy road. I think there's a lot of glamour that is portrayed on screen about this lifestyle, but it's not all sunshine and rainbows.
No, I mean, the industry sucks. Can I say that? Yeah. The industry is absolutely awful. And, I've worked in development, I've worked in production, I've worked in post, I've worked in exhibitions, I've worked in distribution. And, I know we were discussing this earlier, but like if I was to step back out of myself as a complete outsider, would I make a film nowadays? No. I mean, the industry is awful. Sundance, almost no sales coming out of Sundance recently. Very, lackluster lineup is like the buzz. It's a really difficult industry, and it's, increasingly being hijacked by streaming services who, and I think they're, this facade is being broken through, but, you can go viral on one of these streaming platforms, and you'll be set. And that's quite literally not how it works. Netflix buys your film or, licenses exclusive US TVOD, or exclusive US SVOD for 2 years, and you get $5,000. Your film cost $1 million. What does that $5,000 do for you? I mean, you get some visibility, maybe. You might be on that front page for a week, but then the next thing comes along, and if that's not a hit, even with no marketing budget behind it, they move on to the next thing. Yeah. It's always been known as an unforgiving industry. What have you done for me lately? Yeah. And I think it's only getting worse, and yet I have to do it.
There has to be something.
I feel I am compelled. I started off just writing, and I felt powerless, so I built up my other skills. I learned how to shoot better. I learned how to edit better. I learned how to do motion graphics. And it's all kind of come together in a way that's my creative expression. Most films are not going to make money. There's so many films out there. I worked at a distribution company where we released between 400 and 500 titles every year. And, as an aggregate, they made money for the company. They didn't make very much money for the individual filmmakers. And so if you're, purely looking at it from a dollars and cents perspective, I mean, making art never makes sense. It's something within us, that whatever our chosen art form is, it's film has always spoken to me in a way that I've still can barely put my finger on, but it just touches you in an emotional place. And if I could impact somebody's life in the way that my favorite films have impacted me, I would feel extremely fulfilled with my life.
Nice. Yeah. Well, we've spoken about the hardships of this industry. I think that a lot has also changed in terms of accessibility as well. I know you and I spoke earlier about when we started our careers and how just access to gear and the technology that existed then it's completely changed now, and it's really revolutionized, I think, people's ability to make film. And now not everyone, but a lot of people, have access to that equipment, have access to the technology, and they all have stories to tell. They all have a voice. So, in many ways, I think it's an exciting time for film, but there's a lot of noise out there. And it comes down to really making sure that the voices are crafted in correct ways. Care to weigh in on that at all?
Yeah. I think it's really important to have something to say, even if you don't think that it's the most unique perspective in the world, you've got something that you want to say, and there are so many tools to say that thing and to be creative with it. I think I was thinking about this the other day. When we were starting out, it was like mini DV tapes,
right. Yep.
And then like the transition to digital, and now most kids nowadays have never heard of a mini DV tape, right. Which bless them for that, because I'm so glad
we're better
that's
off
done.
having moved past mini DV.
But you can get incredible images. You can get beyond just like the phone that's in your pocket. If you want something with like good color science and a good workflow, you don't have to spend a ton of money to accomplish that now. And then you have all the post-production tools you could ever want. It's just it's easier to get the tools, but I think because there is so much content out there, you have to be really studious and inventive with how you tell your story now. It's not enough to just point a camera at something and edit it together anymore. You have to think about, how can I elevate this? How can I make this look different from everything else out there? Sure. How do you stand out in a sea of thousands and thousands of films being released every year, and
complete oversaturation,
millions of YouTube videos being uploaded every single day? How do you get around that?
And attention span shortening as well.
Attention spans, and algorithms, that push stuff based purely on what you've watched in the past. It's harder than ever to get seen, but it is easier than ever to make the things.
And what do you think is that thing that makes people want to watch, that breaks through? Is there a silver bullet as a filmmaker
God,
and storyteller?
I wish there was a secret sauce that just made it work. But I think I think at the end of the day, it's your perspective. Something that I think any aspiring filmmakers will understand is when you apply to like any sort of lab, they ask you, why are you the one to tell this story? And I always thought that was such a weird question to ask, because it's my thing. Why would I not tell this story? Of course I'm the one to tell it. But I think it's more about how is your process unique to you? What about this story resonates with you? What about what pieces of yourself are in this story, and how are they represented, and how do they evolve? I think that's something that's very important to consider. And I think, even myself, for a long time, I didn't really know what I was trying to say. I always was trying to say something, but I think it was very difficult to figure out, especially when I was working in a way that, I was trying to make work for other people and get other people's attention in that way, versus refining my own process, developing my own visual style, my own structural style. It's challenging to even find the motivation sometimes to do all of those things when you take a step back and look at the media landscape as a whole. But I think you have to know, you have to believe in what you are saying, and believe that it's relevant, believe that it's meaningful, and then present it in a way that hopefully catches people's eyes, whether that's through finding great actors who are going to give, super nuanced performances, whether it's, a unique editing style, a unique visual style, unique structural style. I think there's a lot of ways that you can look at that process. And I think, now that the tools are so readily available, we have a lot of people who are technicians more than anything else. And I think that's also partially due to what the industry demands and what, the job market looks like. Being a technician has been a very prized job skill for, the last 15 years, especially. And a lot of the work that I see, through the jobs that I've had, there's a lot of technicians out there. And there's this drive to like make something that's very refined and, looks quote unquote cinematic.
Right.
I would much rather see a film that looks rough around the edges and can be super rough.
Yeah. I think there's an honesty there, right?
But there's there's
being vulnerable in a lot of ways, telling these stories.
Yeah, when someone is being honest and trying to say something and putting themselves out there through this film and putting everything they have into making this film, right. I think that you can't help but convey that through the work in the end. And I think that's what you've got. That's how you stand out nowadays, I think.
Well, I was going to ask you as a wrap-up question if there were any words of wisdom for future or aspiring filmmakers or current filmmakers, for that matter, that you'd like to impart on the audience.
Oh boy. Do as much as you can yourself. Learn as much of the process as you can. Don't just say, oh, well, I'm a writer, so I'm not going to bother understanding what a director does, what a DP does, what the editor does. I think people are very, there's this tendency to kind of silo yourself in, whatever the skill you're most developed in, right. Because that usually ends up paying the bills on a day-to-day basis. And so you become increasingly honed in on that one field. I think if you want to be a filmmaker, you've got to understand everybody's process. Not to say you have to do everybody's process or, understand the nuance, but understand how everybody contributes, and find new ways to contribute yourself. Like I said, I felt very powerless as a writer, so I developed other skills. And those other skills led me into new avenues of creativity. Something else that I guess I'll also say is, don't put all of your eggs in one basket. Don't have this one project that you're trying to get made, for years on end.
Yep.
Figure out other ways to be creative in the short term. Develop those other skills. Try new things. Nobody ever has to see them. And nobody will ever see, every commissioned work that I've done, I spend weeks, if not months, developing the visual manipulations element of it. And those first iterations are going to be awful and they're not going to work very well, but don't be discouraged. Work through those things. Get those bad ideas out there. I think that's another, at least for writers, You
never know where they're going to go.
You never know where they're going to go. And sometimes you just can't get an idea out of your head until you write it down.
Yeah.
Even if it's bad, just write it, get it out there, and then you're able to move on to the next thing. Don't get too stuck on some idealized version of your project.
There are a million different ways to convince yourself to not do something.
Yeah.
Right. And the only way to do it is to give it a shot.
You just got to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Tom, it's been a pleasure. Great to reconnect. after all these years. Appreciate you having appreciate having you on the show, and I certainly wish you a lot of luck with your future films. And I know we're going to get a lot of great reviews for them. So
hopefully, we'll see. But thank you so much for having me. It's been great reconnecting with you and chatting with you and seeing this incredible space and what you've done.
Thank you so much
for the local community, which is, I'm sure, very much appreciated by everybody, and doing a lot of good for the creative community.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that. And just to remind everybody at home, LMC Media is open and accessible to our community. So if you are an aspiring filmmaker or current filmmaker or any iteration in between, we have free equipment use here. We have our studio space. We have mentors and people who can help answer questions. We have a full edit suite. So if you have an idea in your mind, please come on in, and we'll help you see that vision through into a reality. So on behalf of LMC Media, I'm Matt Sullivan. Tom, it's been a pleasure. Thanks to everybody at home.
Thank you for listening to the LMC Cast Community Profiles, produced at LMC Media's studio on the Avenue. Visit lmcmedia.org to book your time in this state-of-the-art convenient location, walkable from the Metro North train station on Mamaroneck Avenue. You can also support this nonprofit media center at lmcmedia.org/donate.